Today we're going to commence the commentaries on the Quran. We're going to deal with the issue of how Islam originated, what it was, and how it became what it is, and what that means for the faith, both Christian and Islamic, and whether they're one and the same faith. And certainly at the current time they're certainly not the same faith at all. And the question is it either correct? And if so, what have they got correct? We all know the story of the church. We know what happened with Christ. We have the Gospels, explains to us what went on. We know that Christ he was called when he was in his 30s. He was born in the year 5 or 6 BC. He certainly wasn't born in 4 BC as said, or 2 BC or any later period. Now, Satan spent a time trying to kill him, using the world authorities to kill him and to persecute the church and stop its operation. In 30 CE he was killed. He began his ministry in 27, selecting the apostles, and then in 28 CE they began the mission of the church, and they went through to 28, 29 and 30 CE to the Passover when he was executed. He started in 28 when John the Baptist was imprisoned and then killed after the Passover. So his mission was only 2 years. Don't let anyone tell you it was any more, because it had to accord with the sign of Jonah, and the first year was the time of John the Baptist in leading into the mission of the Messiah, and the Messiah declared the acceptable year of the Lord in 27 CE, began his mission after John was imprisoned. And this began the Christian church. He ordained the 70, and the 70 was sent out right throughout the Middle East into Europe, and sent as far west as Britain, where Aristobulus had been ordained by the Christ with Linus as one of the 70, and Aristobulus was sent to Britain, and he began establishing the church on the lands given by Linus's uncle, Arviragus, king of the Silurians, at Glastonbury, to the church. He gave him 12 hides of land, and Aristobulus left his family in Rome with Linus and at the house of the Britons, and went on to Britain and established the church there. And the church was established from Britain right through into the Middle East and on into Bactria and into India. And Thomas established the church in India, and Peter was at Antioch and Baghdad, and he and Andrew went on right up through to the Black Sea, and Andrew went through to the Scythians and into Thrace, and Andrew was killed there. What's important is that we understand that none of this happened in a vacuum, and that the true faith was established by Christ and the apostles, and we need to ascertain what it was that this prophet in Arabia, who emerged at the end of the 6th century and began teaching in the early 7th century, was about. What was his mission? Why was he called? What did he do? The fact of the matter is that the true history has been disguised completely by the Abbasids and these later Muslim scholars, so that you don't know what the truth is. You don't know that the prophet, whose name was not Muhammad, that the prophet Qasim, which was his name, was in fact a Christian minister of the Church of God. And that's important. It's critical you understand that. He was a baptized Christian minister teaching the doctrines of Christ and the apostles and the early church. That you need to know, because on that understanding and those facts depend your future eternal life. The plan of salvation didn't change with Qasim. Now, he was born 570. He went to work for a Jewish Christian family. They had been Christians for a long time. The Christian church in Arabia was established from the 70, as we see in the establishment of the church under the 70, number 122d. Now, it's important to understand what the church was all about, where they went and who they were. The church in Rome has tried their level best, and the Trinitarian offshoots have tried their level best to stop you understanding the facts of the history of the church. That's important. Now, what you have to understand is that as Satan used the church system and undermined it from Rome, he also undermined it from its establishment in the Middle East. Now, where was the church established in the Middle East, and how did the prophet become part of it? What does it mean? What did he teach, and how did he teach it? In that regard, we have written a commentary on the Quran and tied it into the scriptures. The Quran's quite clear. If you want to know what the scriptures say, you go and ask the people of the book. And you were justified over the last, from 1940, not understanding who the people of the book were, because we were sent underground by the false prophet Herbert Armstrong and Andrew Duggar when they brought in the Hillel calendar to the church, and when they brought in ditheism, two gods, and then binitarianism, trying to make sense out of the nonsense of the Protestant system in the United States. You'd be justified in not understanding where the Church of God, the people of the book, were. In fact, there was a doctor wrote to me from North Africa, and they said, "We thought you were all dead," because they couldn't find us, because Herbert Armstrong was teaching an heretical doctrine concerning two gods and the Hillel calendar. So they couldn't find the people of the book. It was all in heresy. The Church of God Seventh Day and the Worldwide Church of God, the Radio Church of God and the Worldwide Church of God that followed it, were in heresy. And they're still in heresy, and that's why they could not convert anybody in Islam. They never baptized a Muslim in their entire existence. And we have only just started in the last 30 years to rectify that and bring in people from Islam into the Church of God. We're now baptizing them and teaching them. Now, the fact of the matter was that Qasim went to work for this Jewish Christian family in Becca. He was born in Becca. And Becca is 27 miles east of Petra and the organisations that are associated with that area. The church was established at Petra and at Damascus and at Antioch and also in Baghdad. It was also established right throughout Palestine, down through to Gaza and into Egypt. Mark was at Alexandria, establishing the church there. It was established in Rome and in Lyon and through Gaul and into Britain. It was established in through southern France, through Irenaeus, and through the apostles into the Po Valley in Italy. It was established throughout the world and into Thrace. Now, Qasim was a member of a clan of the Quraysh, and he lived at Becca. There was nobody in the church at Mecca. There was not a town at Mecca. There wasn't a city there. There was nothing built when Qasim was alive teaching the faith. The faith operating out of Becca was the worship of Hubal. Hubal was the solar deity, and Hubal means the Lord. It was one of the Baal systems of the sun and mystery cults, and they used to sacrifice children there, and Qasim's father, Abdullah, and his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, was part of that system. His grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, had to pay a ransom so that he was not sacrificed as a child to Hubal, and they had to pay 100 camels in place of his sacrifice. Satan did all he could to try and destroy the lineage of the church, there and everywhere else. He knows who the people are of the system, who the elect are, what their lineages are, and he does everything he can to destroy them. He tried to destroy Qasim's grandfather and his father and also him. But that didn't work, and then he went to work for this family, and their daughter, Khadijah, who was older than the Prophet, was quite taken by Qasim, and he married Khadijah, and he was taught to read by Khadijah's uncle in the church at Becca, and he then became a member of the Church of God. He was baptized, and they had, from 470, translated the Bible into Arabic and engraved it on marble stones around Arabia and the Middle East. And they had it in Arabic in Becca. Not all of Qasim's family gave up this worship of Hubal, and the ones that did later became half-hearted devotees of the faith and were corrupted, like the church in Rome were corrupted with the sun and mystery cults. That became extremely important. And what they did later was that they tried to alter the history so that nobody in Islam, once the Abbasid revolt had taken place in 751, they had prepared long before that to overthrow the church in Becca and Islam and replace it with the doctrines of the sun and mystery cults and the worship of Hubal. Now, all of this is known, demonstrated fact. We know for a fact what happened, when it happened, and how the Quran was formed, and how these Abbasids, and Abbas was the Prophet's uncle from Becca, but he was not part of the ruling Rashidun system. Now, the Rashiduns were the rightly guided of the church in Becca, and the caliphs that arose as the rightly guided caliphs under the prophet, and there were 4 of them that came through the Umayyad dynasty and into Damascus and around the world. They were extremely important. But the Umayyad dynasty was replaced in the revolution of 751. In 699, the church had been quite capable of overthrowing this worship of Hubal and the child sacrifice and the sun and mystery cults at Becca. So what they did was they moved, under the Abbasids, moved the Kaaba, which was the box that contained the meteorite, the enclosure, the black enclosure, which is now at Mecca. They moved from Becca to Kufa, and they established the system at Kufa, and they altered some of the scripts of the Quran in relation to the food laws and other things. And that's why they then insisted that all copies of the Quran had to be in Kufic script. By 751, they had initiated the rebellion, the civil war, under the Abbasids, and moved the centre of worship from the Umayyads at Damascus to the Abbasids at Baghdad. They also moved the Kaaba and the system from Kufa to Mecca, and then established the fiction that Mecca was the centre of the faith. They then altered the Quran so that the words relating to Becca had the diacritical point at the start of the B. Remember, it runs from right to left, not left to right. They then put the curl to change B to M, and change the concept that the faith was from Mecca. And they then said that the Hijrah was in 622 from Mecca. And then they moved to Medina. That is utterly false. There were 2 Hijras, and they established the church in 613 as a missionary activity under the Council of the Church. Now, the Council of the Church was named the Muhammad. Muhammad was not the name of the prophet, it was the name of the Council of the Church, of which the prophet became one of the elders and the leader of the council. He thus achieved Muhammadan status as one of the Muhammad, but his name was Qasim. He became a very important member of the church at Becca, and he began to establish a large community of the Church of God. He kept the Sabbaths, he kept the new moons, he kept the feasts, he kept the temple calendar. He did not keep Hillel. He kept the Day of Atonement on a different day to the Jews. who were keeping Hillel. He kept the Sabbaths on different times. That is, the Sabbaths, the holy days of the feasts, were on different times. 1/3 of the times, the feasts were a month out under Hillel. So they kept the feasts a month differently to the Hillel calendar under the Jews. But they all kept the Sabbaths, they all kept the new moons, and they all kept the feasts. Now that's covered in the Sabbath in the Koran. They're all baptized. That's covered also in the texts on the covenant and the operations of the law and the testimony in Islam. There are a series of works associated on the list of the Quran at the bottom of the different works relating to the faith as they were practiced by the church at Mecca and what original Islam did. And also the paper on the Islamic and Hebrew calendar reconciled, on the 53, is very important in understanding that. And the Islamic scholars have now, since we pointed out how it has to be reconciled, are now putting together academic works that they couldn't possibly date given the false calendars of the Islamic system under the Abbasids. That is really important. When God revealed things to the prophet, he did it through the angel Gabriel. And he did it through the cave. And the prophet was there being trained, and he had visions in the cave at Hura. There is no cave at Mecca. The circumambulations of the Kaaba at Mecca did not occur there at all until 751 rebellion movements. And there is nowhere of the stoning of Satan at Mecca. It was an artificial contrivance. All of that was done at Mecca, and the cave is near Petra in the Wadi Rum. So also the temple of the goddess Alat was there, and the Kaaba was there. And that's where they sacrificed children to Hubal. And the prophet, Qasim, as a member and leader of the church, stamped it out. That went on. He received these revelations. Now the Quran is written from Surah 1 to Surah 114. But that's not the way it was issued. It was issued from Mecca in stages, and it wasn't from one. Surah 1 is not the first revelation of God to the prophet through Gabriel in the Quran. What we have done in the summary and the commentary of the Quran is listed all of the surahs in the order that they were given. They range from very early Bekan surahs through to early Bekan surahs, middle Bekan surahs, late Bekan surahs, and then they go to revelations at Medina. There were some things given at Medina which were added to the early surahs to add understanding to them from Medina. The first persecution of the church took place in 613. In the year 613, the first Hijrah occurred. The Deccan authorities were worshippers of Hubal, engaging in child sacrifice and other things. They were persecuting. They wanted to stamp out the church's operations in Becca. In order to stamp them out, they had to take on the clans and families. Now the Quraysh, Qasim's family was too powerful, too well respected. So they couldn't do that. But they could, to the poorer people, they could persecute them. The prophet's cousin was tasked with taking all of the early church, and never forget, it was the church at Becca, not any pseudo-Muslim activity, not keeping the law and the testimony and the temple calendar. That's what they did. They were taken to the nearest place of refuge. They couldn't get any refuge because Gregory had established the church under the Holy Roman Empire from 590. 23 years later, when they came under persecution, they couldn't go to Damascus. They could only go to the nearest Sabbath-keeping Unitarian system that would provide refuge, and that was, they were at Becca. They had to go down to the Gulf of Aqaba, get on a boat, and sail down to through the Red Sea to Qasim, and appealed to the Negus at Qasim, the king at Qasim, for refuge under the Church of God in Abyssinia. Remember, Philip had baptized the eunuch who was chief steward to Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, in the 1st century, and he'd gone back and he's established the church in Abyssinia, and its headquarters was at Qasim, and the bishops of the church, the Abyssinian church, were summoned to see and determine whether these people who came from Becca in the Nabatean kingdom were part of them. That investigation took place, and they gave their evidence, and the Beccan pagans sent their emissaries to get the Negus to order their return, to stop giving them refuge, so they could take them back and kill them, persecute the people. That didn't happen. So these God-fearing, Sabbath-keeping, Quartodeciman, Unitarian, food law-keeping people were given refuge. That's covered in Surah 19, Maryam. And it deals with all the records of what they said and how the Negus ascertained what they were and gave them refuge. That is never discussed by these Abbasids, nor is the understanding of the cave, which we have explained, because that deals with the persecutions of the early church for the first 309 years. All of this is critical stuff. The understanding of what each surah means is of specific reference to the law and the testimony and the temple calendar. You can't understand the Quran without the Bible, because the Quran is commentary on the Bible. There are 9,000 biblical texts referred to in the 114 surahs of the Quran. We have identified them, listed them, and our commentary on the Quran shows you what they are. Now, how they relate to the faith is explained within the surahs and the commentaries, and also on the summary of the commentary of the Quran in the 5 sections from Q001, that's A, B, C, D, E, F. Those 5 sections will show you exactly when these things were released, what they mean, and how they relate to the faith. From 751, the false scholars of the Abbasids decided that they had to cut the calendar from the temple calendar. So to do that, they declared that the faith required that they cut out the intercalations, because there had been a throwaway reference to the fact there were 12 months in the Bible. They didn't allow the 13th intercalary month to take effect, not realising that that's standard doctrine in the temple calendar and the biblical structure of the law. You can't deal with these people because they are total liars. They then changed some of the text in the surahs relating to the food laws so they could eat camel at Eid, because that was when they were practicing child sacrifice. And it's totally related to child sacrifice. What the Abbasids did was pervert the Quran by lies and forgeries, and they have destroyed the understanding of Islam. What we have done is to restore the temple calendar to the faith and explain what the Quran means. And you can't get away from it, because the Quran itself says, if you don't understand the scriptures, go and ask the people of the book, and that people we are. We are the temple of God, and Qasim was one of our ministers. My predecessor in the Nabatean kingdom. That's who he was. But that's what he was. My predecessor and the predecessor of the Muhammad in Nabatea at Petra and Becca. And you can't get away from that. It's important that you understand all of that, because you can't learn. You can't recover your position and take your part in the first resurrection. You can't be allowed to go into the millennium at the return of the Messiah if you don't repent, if you don't learn. If we can't teach you, you'll have to die and go to the second resurrection, and we'll retrain you there. But you will be retrained, either now or at the second resurrection of the dead. And you better understand that, because there is no way out. Islam as you know it will be stamped from the face of the earth. The Sharia will be stamped from the face of the earth. We are here to teach you the truth, to restore the faith for you and restore the faith for Christianity. In the same way, we'll stamp out Eid, we'll stamp out Christmas, Easter, and the structures that corrupt the faith, both in pseudo-Islam and pseudo-Christianity, in Buddhism and Hinduism and all around the world. The Messiah, Al-Masih, will be here in 4 years' time. Satan's time is up, and we are going to teach everybody the faith, whether they like it or not. And if they don't want to learn, they will go to the second resurrection and we will deal with them then. It's important for your survival.